Okay, the next thing to consider is when you're making something, the order of operation. Certain things have to be done before you can do other things. Like you don't really have to dye the bag before you do all the other parts, the next parts, but it's just a lot easier. And dip dyeing things doesn't always work so good. So that's important. In this case, we're looking specifically at what we're making. So we have this little pocket, and it's sure as heck going to be a lot easier to put this together and have this little pocket already on this front piece before. Otherwise, it's going to be a real pain to try to get in there and apply those rivets. So you have to be conscious of that. So in this case, we're going to prep our little pieces for our pocket so that we can get them put on ahead of time. That will make it a lot easier. Some things you just can't do that because you're just not sure how they're going to line up. But this is one area where, having done this a bunch of times, this will make a difference. So let's talk about another tool. In this case, the handy dandy hole punch. Okay, so we're going to use this to punch the holes for our rivets. Now, you could be all technical about this and measure stuff, and you know what? That's all well and good. But what I tend to do is just eyeball it. It's very simple to use. Okay, you're basically, I'm doing this backwards, so it's a little hard. Okay, you're basically going to take and you're going to line it up with that groove that we already put in there. Okay, and I'm going to just check my work here. And squeeze. Now we have a hole. All right, and just work our way around there, evenly spaced, whatever spacing you choose to use. I usually like to go to the extremes first to see where things are and then kind of fill it out in between. Understand though, when you're applying a rivet, unlike a thread, the thread applies that pressure and seals it pretty much in that immediate right there area. Anything to the other side of that is not going to be squished together too much. However, a rivet, you have the whole head there. So I'm making all this area now tight. So in this case, I want to be able to make sure that a credit card can slip in there. So I want to make sure that I put the rivets as far out as I can to allow room for that. Now, when I planned this, obviously I did that ahead of time. But it's something that you're considering when you construct stuff, and just realize that the rivet head, okay, determines all the pressure in that area. So if you put the rivet head too close to something, you might not be able to put an object in a pocket or something. Okay, and there we go. All our holes are on there. When I first made this design, I actually hand stitched the pocket on there, but that's just such a significant amount of time, and I just didn't really want to mess with it. So now the next step is I'm going to lay this bit on top of here, this part, and basically get it centered, and I'm just going to mark those holes and do the same thing. And that way I know everything will line up perfectly when I go to... Okay, so simply by using this part as a template, I laid it over top of the front part, and then I just made little marks so that I know where to punch. This is theoretically close enough that I could hold it and punch it, but things shift. You don't want to do that if you don't have to. Also, marking it, I used one of these little pens. A ballpoint pen works. You can use an awl to make a hole. You're going to make a hole there after all. Whatever just shows up as well. When you use black, there's actually some chalk things and things you can use to mark on black as well. Okay, guys. So in the case of this thing, we have like a medallion. Okay, some sort of embellishment that we're going to put on here that we riveted on. So I found something that looked particularly appropriate. I put some holes in it with the hole punch, and then I had to mark the leather so I know where the holes go. And the idea is we will also, while we're riveting, we're going to rivet that on there using those holes. Make sure that whatever connection you're using is sturdy, considering what the object is. If it's a purse or a bag or something that's going to be slung around and stuff, you don't want to glue stuff on. You want a mechanical or sew it on or something like that. The only problem with sewing stuff on is a lot of times the stitches show, so it doesn't necessarily always translate or look as attractive. In the steampunk stuff, the rivet heads kind of go with that look, so that works really well. So that's what we're going to do. And I have this awesome device for making holes in things. It's It's like a hole puncher, but it's really for metal, and I can make all kinds of holes. I could also use a drill bit or even a punch, or like just a drive punch, but that tends to give the cleanest look. So the next thing we'll do is start putting all these rivets together so that we can get that in, and we also have to put our closure on here as well. Okay, so for this flap, we actually have a button stud as the closure. Okay, so this little thingy can close. It's simple. It doesn't take up a lot of landscape on the actual bag itself. It doesn't. It's very reliable. And again, let's face it, you're not going to put a whole lot on there. It's not a top secret, super awesome thing. So I just use these button studs. Okay, and they're basically just like a little brass jobby. Give you the finger. Okay, and it's got a hole in the bottom, and then there's like a rivet that you're going to press into the bottom to make that happen. These tend to be a little difficult. There are also ones that screw on, so you have to kind of pick and choose what's going to work the best for you. In this case, I like to use a piece of leather to protect it, and then I just kind of... Okay, we had a little accident there, but that's okay. Everybody's alive to try to get it to line up. We did all the rivets. I can also use my press. Now they're all set. That sometimes you can tell they can get pretty flat. You have to kind of I actually use then the flat end to squish these so that they're not so pushed out, and this will make for a better look. In that case, I just used the hammer, and it worked just as good. Okay. Sometimes they get a little. The only problem is it deforms. You may need to bend it or adjust it for what I need. Flat. Now I'll go put on the other stuff. There we go. Now we're ready to mount the whole thing. The pocket will be ready to be mounted to the front of the bag. Let's talk briefly about rivets. Okay. A lot of the rivets you're going to see are two-part rivets. There's the stud part, and then there's the cap. Okay, which is a little thingy that sits on top, and then you essentially squish them together. There are copper rivets that have burrs where you actually have to snip it and pound it over. They're a lot of work. They would be similar to the ones you find on jeans, okay, on those corners. They're for really heavy duty stuff, and then there's also split rivets. But this is the kind of rivets that you're going to see the most of, and here I have them in this handy dandy organizer by size. The size is the thickness of the rivet. The thickness of the material it will hold, and then of course the size of the rivet cap itself. You can also get ones that have both ends are nice. In this case, nobody's going to really see the back of it, so it doesn't matter that the back is kind of a different material or that you're not going to see it. And then when I'm making this, simply what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the smallest rivet and I poke them through the holes. Okay, this is what's going to mount that special thing. So we just push them through the holes. And there's enough, the whole thickness is such that the diameter that they'll just sort of stay in there. And then it comes time to secure everything. Now I used an inordinate amount of rivets for this little project to put these on here. I'm not exactly sure why I used so many. Okay, the next step is we have our rivets in there. And we're going to take our piece of material, okay, that we're going to mount on there, and we just simply lay them together, making sure that we have the right side up and that we have all the holes lined up well. Sometimes your holes get a little bit misaligned, so you have to make sure that you have it the way you want it. Also make sure that, we're human beings. We don't always line things up perfectly. So make sure that when you're lining this up that you kind of remember that there was probably a certain side that you did it. The holes aren't going to be perfect. So that when you're putting that together, that everything lines up nice. Okay? And sometimes you have to give it a little bit of persuasion. Okay, so now all those pieces, all those rivets are through the piece. And now we're going to put the rivets on. So we have all these on here, and now we need to put the rivet caps on. So I'm going to use the small one. They're called extra small. There's generally extra small, small, medium, and large. So again, you have to kind of consider. Sometimes I will use, if I have a lot of thickness of material, but I don't want to make a huge visual impact on the top, then I'll use the thin little head rivet caps, but a really thick, large underneath. So there we got it. It's all on there. It actually has kind of become part of the design. I could probably swap those out and maybe use some antique silver or something like that. But for now, I think I'm just going to leave it this way. So the next part is we got to set the rivets. So for this, there's a lot of different things. I have a press that does it. Sometimes there's like squeezy tools that you can use. I'm just going to use this piece that's got a flat side, and then it's also got a depression side that you just simply hold over. Okay, so you're going to just take the depression and just put it over there, and then you're going to tap them on. Okay, so we'll set the rivets. And I always use this kind of hammer because the plastic will not deform the tool. So we did all the rivets. Now they're all set. You can tell they can get pretty flat. I actually use then the flat end to squish these so that they're not so pushed out. And this will make for a better look. Let's give you a little close-up. All right. Of what we're doing. Okay, and then you may need to bend it or adjust it to keep it flat. And then there we go. Now we're ready to mount the whole thing on our front of our bag. Now, one of the important parts of this is we have this stud. We have to make a hole in this flap. We can do that afterwards, but it's a lot easier to do it when we're ready. So we just line these two holes up that we've already done in the flap. Okay, so we have two holes that line up with those two holes, okay, on the front. This will kind of get us where this sits. So now we're looking at the back of it, you're looking at the front of it, and now what we're going to do is we're going to fold that down and press hard, and you can see I've already done it. So there's like a little depression right there so that we know where to put the hole. Okay, there's a special hole punch that goes there. You can also just punch a normal hole and then cut a slit in it, but it's just so much easier when you have the right tool. Again, simple version, you punch a hole and then cut a slit towards the top. That allows that hole to expand to receive the rounder part of the button stud. I have tools that do it for me, so we're just going to use that. So we can sort of see where the mark is, making sure that we place it where we need to. You make the little fin goes towards the top. Makes a perfect hole with the little slit. And the idea is then when you squeeze this over, okay, fits in and it stays on there. Okay, that's a nice way to do that, and it's easy. Okay, so all our component parts are ready to be assembled. We have our pocket flap, small pocket flap with the hole in it. We have the front of our pocket with the holes in it. We've got this put on already, and we have our button stud mounted. And then we have the front of the bag, okay, that has all the holes in it ready to go. We're missing one at the bottom, but I'll put that in because it's pretty easy to do. All right, so we'll start attaching the rivets to the back and then go from there. So again, because I'm only going through two pieces of material, the smaller, what's called the extra small rivet, will work fine. And because nobody's really going to see the inside of this, I can use these sort of ends that aren't really as attractive, and it's not going to hurt anything. So we're just going through and placing the rivets through the holes. You always got to remember what side of the thing you're on, so you want your rivets, the stud part, to come up through. Work your way around. And again, I used to sew these, but the amount of time it took to sew was just, it increased the price. You have to consider your market when you're making stuff, if that's your goal. If you're making this for you, then it doesn't really matter. This is all, if it's your hobby, if you're doing it for fun, if you're doing it for a survival situation, time is important. Okay? So, we have everything lined up. Now that we have all our holes through, we have to start, and again, think order of operation. The flap actually is underneath the main pocket, so I have to attach those parts on first. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to stick this part on now, and then we'll work our way around. Didn't take very long. Now we got to attach the next part, which is the pocket itself. Okay, this is sometimes tricky because, again, remember that humans aren't always perfect. The great thing about leather is it stretches a little bit, so a lot of times you can just give it a little persuasion and on it is. Okay, and just be careful, but there you go. So we have all those studs coming through, and I just got to put the hole in this one bottom one, and we're ready to put the rivets on. Okay, and a way to do this, if you're trying to make sure that stuff lines up, is I already have the hole there. I just go through that same hole into the base material, the front of the bag with the punch, and now I have a hole. It's going to line up perfectly. Just realize that when you do that, those punches are actually graduated or gradated, so they're smaller at the tip and wider as you go into the material, so it will make that hole a little larger. Okay, so now we have all our rivets on, and we start putting the caps on. Again, remember that the rivet cap, okay, the bigger the rivet cap, the more area that it's going to hold. Also, the tighter it's going to make that pocket, or more narrow, I should say, that pocket's going to be. So I'm going to go through, and I use the smallest rivets. Also, in terms of strength, it's really not a strength issue. There's nothing in here that I'm worried about breaking or busting out or anything like that. So we go around, and we put all of our rivets together. Okay, and there they are. They're all on there. And now comes the time that we have to go through and smash them down. We used our hammer. Use the plastic or a brass side because you don't want to damage your tool. If I were to use a metal type of thing, like a steel, it would mushroom this tip over, and it would have the flakes piece would actually come off. And again, see how that there's a little concave depression in there. It sits really nicely onto the things. There is no particular order that you need to go unless the leather itself is under some sort of stress, like you're stretching wet leather. Sometimes you can, if you're doing a molding, you will want to go a certain direction. In this case, it doesn't matter. So I actually went through with the rounded tip. Now I'm going to flip it over and use the flat tip just to sort of take a little bit of that concave bit off, because I kind of want it to look a little flatter. There we go. Done. Okay, and in our pocket, check our pocket for fit and finish. Voila! There we go. So now we have this part done. Now we could try to put the hardware on for the swing clasp. That's going to come on here. But right now I like to wait, because sometimes it's a little bit off, or there's a little bit of adjustment you need to worry with, and it's not that difficult to really mount in here. So I'm going to wait on that.